first snowflake of December landed on my nose as I stood on the front porch, surveying my kingdom. Well, not exactly a kingdom, more like a modest two-story house on Evergreen Lane. But it was mine. And this year, it was going to be spectacular. "Martha," I called through the open door. "The lights arrived." My wife appeared, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. After 32 years of marriage, she knew that gleam in my eye. She'd seen it when I decided to build a deck by myself, which took 3 summers, when I tried to restore a vintage car still sitting in the garage, and every December for the past 15 years. "Oh no, Henry. Not again." "Not again?" I gestured to the stack of boxes the delivery truck had just deposited. "This year is different. This year, I'm going to win the Evergreen Lane Christmas Decoration Contest." Martha sighed, but I caught the smile tugging at her lips. "You say that every year, dear." "Yes, but this year I mean it." I pulled out my phone and showed her the elaborate diagram I'd been working on for months. The screen was covered in color-coded symbols, measurements, and technical specifications that would make an engineer proud. 20,000 LED lights, 12 animated reindeer, and not those cheap inflatable ones either. These are the premium models with synchronized movements. A life-size nativity scene with hand-carved wooden figures I commissioned from an artist in Vermont. And the pièce de résistance, a synchronized light show set to music that broadcasts on its own radio frequency so people can listen in their cars. "Henry, that's magnificent." "I know." I was going to say excessive, but sure. She kissed my cheek, her lips warm against the December chill. "Just don't electrocute yourself. The grandchildren are coming for Christmas, and they'd like their grandfather alive and capable of making his famous hot chocolate." As Martha returned to her baking, she was already 36 cookies into her annual holiday baking marathon. I couldn't contain my excitement. For 15 years, my neighbor Gregory Thornton had won the decoration contest. 15 consecutive years. 15 years of his smug face plastered in the local newspaper, holding that ridiculous golden wreath trophy. 15 years of his insufferable superiority every time we collected our mail at the same time. "Lovely weather we're having, Henry," he'd say, somehow making it sound like an insult. His voice would be pleasant enough, but his eyes would be cold, calculating. Of course, not as lovely as the weather we had last Christmas when I won. Again. That makes 15 if I'm counting correctly, which I am. But this year would be different. I had planned, I had prepared. I had even consulted with a professional lighting designer from the city, a woman named Svetlana who'd done displays for shopping malls and luxury hotels. She'd looked at my house, nodded approvingly, and said in her thick accent, "Yes, we can work with this. We make it spectacular." And spectacular it would be. I'd spent 6 months planning this display. 6 months of sketches, calculations, and careful budgeting. Martha thought I was being obsessive, but she didn't understand. This wasn't just about Christmas lights. This was about dignity, pride. Proving that Henry Bennett was more than just Gregory Thornton's perennial runner-up. I was so lost in my thoughts that I didn't notice Gregory himself walking up my driveway until he was practically on top of me, his shadow falling across the boxes like a bad omen. "Henry, what's all this?" He gestured to my boxes with the ivory-handled cane he didn't need, but carried anyway because he thought it made him look distinguished. It didn't. It made him look like a caricature of wealth, which, I suppose, was exactly what he was. Just a few Christmas decorations. A gesture I'd learned over the years meant he was scheming. Well, good luck with that. Though I should mention that I've just ordered something rather special myself, imported from Bavaria. You might have heard of Klaus Weihnachten, the premier Christmas decorator in all of Europe. He's personally designing my display this year. He normally only takes commissions from royalty and Fortune 500 companies, but I convinced him to make an exception. My heart sank a little, but I kept my face neutral. That's nice, Gregory. Nice? It's going to be transcendent, revolutionary. Klaus told me himself that my display will be unlike anything ever seen in a residential setting. He's incorporating traditional Bavarian techniques with cutting-edge technology. There will be holographic projections, Henry. Holograms. He turned to leave, then paused, as if a thought had just occurred to him, though I knew he'd been planning this parting shot the whole time. Oh, and Henry? Don't feel bad when you lose again. Some people are simply born with superior aesthetic sensibilities. It's not your fault that you lack the refined taste necessary for true Christmas artistry. As he walked away, his cane clicking on the pavement with each step, I felt my competitive spirit ignite like a string of faulty Christmas lights, sudden, intense, and slightly dangerous. Martha, I called again, probably loud enough for Gregory to hear. We need more lights, and call Svetlana. Tell her to double everything. Part 2, the beginning of the end. Over the next 2 weeks, Evergreen Lane transformed into a battlefield of tinsel and twinkling lights. I worked from dawn until well past dark, stringing lights along every surface, positioning reindeer with mathematical precision, and testing my synchronized light show until I could hear Carol of the Bells in my dreams. My daily routine became almost military in its precision. 6 a.m., wake up, check weather forecast, adjust plans accordingly. 7 a.m., breakfast while reviewing the day's installation schedule. 8 a.m. to noon, outdoor work. Oh no, Henry. Not again. Not again. I gestured to the stack of boxes the delivery truck had just deposited. This year is different. This year, I'm going to win the Evergreen Lane Christmas Decoration Contest. Martha sighed, but I caught the smile tugging at her lips. You say that every year, dear. Yes, but this year I mean it. I pulled out my phone and showed her the elaborate diagram I'd been working on for months. The screen was covered in color-coded symbols, measurements, and technical specifications that would make an engineer proud. 20,000 LED lights, 12 animated reindeer, and not those cheap 15 consecutive years. 15 years of his smug face plastered in the local newspaper, holding that ridiculous golden wreath trophy. 15 years of his insufferable superiority every time we collected our mail at the same time. Lovely weather we're having, Henry, he'd say, somehow making it sound like an insult. His voice would be pleasant enough, but his eyes would be cold, calculating. Of course, not as lovely as the weather we had last Christmas when I won. Again. That makes 15 if I'm counting correctly, which I am. But this year would be different. I had planned, I had prepared. I had even consulted with a professional lighting designer from the city, a woman named Svetlana who'd done displays for shopping malls and luxury hotels. She'd looked at my house, nodded approvingly, and said in her thick accent, "Yes, we can work with this. We make it spectacular." And spectacular it would be. I'd spent 6 months planning this display. 6 months of sketches, calculations, and careful budgeting. Martha thought I was being obsessive, but she didn't understand. This wasn't just about Christmas lights. This was about dignity, pride. Proving that Henry Bennett was more than just Gregory Thornton's perennial runner-up. I was so lost in my thoughts that I didn't notice Gregory himself walking up my driveway until he was practically on top of me, his shadow falling across the boxes like a bad omen. "Henry, what's all this?" He gestured to my boxes with the ivory-handled cane he didn't need, but carried anyway because he thought it made him look distinguished. It didn't. It made him look like a caricature of wealth, which, I suppose, was exactly what he was. "Just a few Christmas decorations," I said casually, trying to keep my voice level. Gregory's eyes narrowed behind his expensive wire-rimmed glasses. He was a tall, thin man with silver hair that he kept impeccably groomed, and a mustache that he probably spent an hour on each morning, trimming and waxing until it looked like something from a Victorian photograph. He wore a cashmere coat that probably cost more than my car, and his shoes were so shiny I could see my reflection in them. "A few? There must be 24 boxes here. 23, actually. Plus another shipment coming tomorrow." "I see." He stroked his mustache. A gesture I'd learned over the years meant he was scheming. "Well, good luck with that. Though I should mention that I've just ordered something rather special myself. Imported from Bavaria. You might have heard of Klaus Weihnachten, the premier Christmas decorator in all of Europe. He's personally designing my display this year. He normally only takes commissions from royalty and Fortune 500 companies, but I convinced him to make an exception." My heart sank a little, but I kept my face neutral. "That's nice, Gregory." "Nice? It's going to be transcendent, revolutionary. Klaus told me himself that my display will be unlike anything ever seen in a residential setting. He's incorporating traditional Bavarian techniques with cutting-edge technology. There will be holographic projections, Henry. Holograms." He turned to leave, then paused, as if a thought had just occurred to him, though I knew he'd been planning this parting shot the whole time. "Oh, and Henry, don't feel bad when you lose again. Some people are simply born with superior aesthetic sensibilities. It's not your fault that you lack the refined taste necessary for true Christmas artistry." As he walked away, his cane clicking on the pavement with each step, I felt my competitive spirit ignite like a string of faulty Christmas lights, sudden, intense, and slightly dangerous. "Martha," I called again, probably loud enough for Gregory to hear. "We need more lights, and call Svetlana. Tell her to double everything." Part 2, the beginning of the end. Over the next 2 weeks, Evergreen Lane transformed into a battlefield of tinsel and twinkling lights. I worked from dawn until well past dark, stringing lights along every surface, positioning reindeer with mathematical precision, and testing my synchronized light show until I could hear Carol of the Bells in my dreams. My daily routine became almost military in its precision. 6 a.m., wake up, check weather forecast, adjust plans accordingly. 7 a.m., breakfast while reviewing the day's installation schedule. 8 a.m. to noon, outdoor work while the weather was best. Noon to 1 p.m., lunch and a brief rest. 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., more outdoor work. 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Dinner and quality time with Martha, negotiated down from her initial demand of 3 hours. 7 p.m. to midnight. Programming the light sequences, testing electrical loads, and making constant adjustments. But Gregory was working too, and his schedule seemed even more intense than mine. I'd wake up at 6 a.m. to find him already outside, directing a crew of professional installers. While I was doing most of the work myself, with occasional help from Martha and some neighborhood teenagers I'd hired, Gregory had what appeared to be an entire construction company working on his display. Each day, his yard transformed further into something that looked less like a Christmas display and more like a theme park attraction. First came the 12-foot Christmas tree made entirely of ice sculptures that somehow didn't melt despite the heat from the surrounding lights. I later learned he'd installed an industrial refrigeration system specifically to maintain it. Then came the animatronic Santa's workshop, which was less of a decoration and more of an actual building. It was a perfect replica of a workshop from a Victorian Christmas card, complete with moving elves that actually appeared to be hammering and sawing. Through the windows, you could see them working at benches, their movements fluid and lifelike. Gregory had apparently hired the company that made animatronics for Disney theme parks. Then came the snow machine. Not a simple sprayer, but an industrial-grade system that covered his entire lawn in perfect, pristine white powder every morning at exactly 5 a.m. The snow was somehow formulated to look real while not melting quickly, creating a winter wonderland that lasted all day regardless of the actual temperature. And he wasn't done. A crew spent 3 full days installing what appeared to be a professional sound system, with speakers hidden in trees and shrubs throughout his yard. The music that emanated from his display wasn't just Christmas songs. It was full orchestral arrangements that he'd apparently commissioned from the local symphony. "This is getting ridiculous," Martha said one evening as we watched Gregory unveil a 40-foot projection of the northern lights that danced across his house. The display was stunning, creating the illusion that his suburban home had somehow been transported to Iceland. "You do realize it's just a contest, right?" "Just a contest." I was up on a ladder adjusting a spotlight on one of my reindeer. I'd spent 2 hours positioning this particular light to create the perfect shadow effect. "Martha, this is about pride. This is about dignity. And this is about showing Gregory Thornton that he can't just..." The ladder wobbled. Martha grabbed it, steadying me with surprising strength for a woman who claimed she couldn't open pickle jars. "It's about showing Gregory that you're just as good as him," she finished gently. "Henry, you don't need to prove anything, not to him and not to yourself." But she was wrong. I did need to prove something, not just to Gregory, but to myself. I'd spent 15 years being the runner-up. He also ran the nice try of Evergreen Lane. I spent 15 years reading the newspaper article that inevitably began with, "Gregory Thornton has done it again," followed by a paragraph about his display, and then maybe, a brief mention of mine. Runner-up Henry Bennett also put on a fine show, they'd write. Like I was a child who'd lost a spelling bee and deserved a participation trophy. I was tired of being the punchline to Gregory's victory story. By December 15th, I'd completed about 70% of my display, and I had to admit it looked impressive. The synchronized light show was working perfectly, with 20,000 LED lights dancing in time to a 15-song playlist I'd carefully curated. My reindeer looked like they were actually prancing across the roof. The nativity scene was positioned perfectly on the lawn, with a spotlight that made it visible from 3 blocks away. But Gregory's display was something else entirely. By the same date, his house looked like the North Pole had relocated to Evergreen Lane. He'd added a working carousel with hand-painted horses wearing Christmas decorations. He'd installed what he called a reindeer landing pad on his roof complete with animatronic reindeer that moved around in a pattern suggesting they'd just landed. He'd even, and this was the part that really got to me, created a small ice skating rink in his backyard, visible from the street, with mechanical skaters gliding in endless loops. "Henry," Martha said carefully one evening as we sat at dinner, "maybe you should ease up a little. You barely slept this week." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You came to bed at 3 a.m. last night, and you were up again at 5. There's a lot to do. There's always going to be a lot to do. That's the nature of obsession. It can never be satisfied." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm worried about you." "I know. I'm sorry." And I was. Martha had been patient through all my various obsessions over the years, but this one was different. This one had consumed me in a way the others hadn't. "After the contest, I'll take a break. I promise." "Will you? Or will you spend the next 11 months planning for next year's contest?" I didn't have an answer for that. By December 20th, both of our houses looked like they'd been personally decorated by Santa's entire workforce, assuming Santa's workforce had unlimited budgets and no concept of restraint. The local news had even sent a reporter to cover what they were calling the Great Christmas War of Evergreen Lane. The reporter was a young woman named Jessica Chen, eager and enthusiastic, with a camera crew that seemed to enjoy the spectacle as much as she did. "Mr. Bennett," she said, shoving a microphone in my face while the camera rolled, "how do you feel about your chances this year?" "Confident," I said, then noticed Gregory standing behind the camera crew, smirking in that way that made me want to throw a snowball at his perfectly groomed head. "Very confident." "And can you tell us about your display? What makes it special?" I launched into my prepared speech about the synchronized lights, the imported nativity figures, the complex electrical systems I'd designed. As I talked, I could see Gregory's smirk grow wider, which should have been a warning. "Fascinating," Jessica said when I finished. "And Mr. Thornton, you've won 15 consecutive years. Do you think Mr. Bennett's display poses a real threat?" Gregory laughed, a sound like ice cubes in an empty glass, cold, hard, and artificial. "A threat? Henry's display is charming in its own way. It reminds me of a child's first attempt at finger painting. Enthusiastic, but ultimately primitive. There's a certain naive quality to it that I find almost endearing." The reporter's eyes widened. This was good television. "Primitive?" I stepped forward, my face hot despite the December cold. "Gregory, your display looks like a Christmas store exploded on your lawn and then got hit by a Disney ride. At least my display has taste and sophistication." "Taste?" "You have a giant inflatable snowman wearing sunglasses and giving a thumbs up. It's whimsical. It's postmodern commentary on the commercialization of Christmas. It's tacky. It's everything that's wrong with Christmas. You've turned a holiday about peace and goodwill into a competition about who can spend the most money. Oh, that's rich coming from you, Henry. You spent thousands on your display. At least I designed mine myself instead of hiring some European decorator. At least I have the good taste to know when to hire an expert." Martha pulled me away before I could say something I'd regret. The camera crew was eating this up, recording every word of our argument. "Henry, you're on camera," Martha hissed in my ear. "Everyone in town is going to see this." I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. My heart was racing and my hands were shaking. Whether from anger or cold or exhaustion, I wasn't sure. "You're right. I'm sorry." I turned back to the camera, trying to smile. "May the best display win." Gregory's smile was all teeth, sharp and predatory. "It always does, Henry. It always does." As the news crew packed up their equipment, I stood in my yard looking at my display. It was good. maybe even great. But was it enough to beat Gregory? I honestly didn't know anymore. Come inside, Martha said gently. It's cold, and you need rest. Just a few more adjustments, I said. Henry, please, just let me finish this one thing. She sighed but nodded, heading inside and leaving me alone with my lights and my obsession. I worked for another 3 hours that night, adjusting angles, tweaking timing sequences, trying to achieve some undefined perfection that I couldn't quite visualize but would somehow know when I saw it. At midnight, I finally stopped. Not because I was satisfied, but because my body simply refused to continue. I trudged inside, barely able to keep my eyes open, and fell into bed without even taking off my shoes. Martha had left a note on my pillow. I love you, but this has to stop. I fell asleep holding that note, knowing she was right, but unable to admit it, even to myself. Part 3. The sabotage. I should have known something was wrong when I woke up on December 21st and my display wouldn't turn on. I'd tested everything the night before. Every bulb, every connection, every animated figure. It had been perfect. I'd stood in the street at 11 p.m., watching my creation dance and sparkle, feeling that rare moment of satisfaction when something you've worked on exceeds your expectations. Now nothing. Complete darkness where there should have been light. I stood in my front yard at 6 a.m. in my bathrobe and slippers, frantically checking breakers and outlets, my breath coming out in visible puffs in the cold morning air. Martha brought me coffee and a coat, her face worried. What happened? She asked. I don't know. Everything was working last night, everything. I pulled on the coat, shivering. The temperature had dropped overnight, and frost covered everything in a thin, crystalline layer. Could be a circuit issue, maybe a trip breaker, or possibly some kind of central control failure. But I tested all of these systems, multiple times. I traced the main power line from the house to the central control box I'd installed to manage all the different circuits. Everything seemed fine. The breakers were on. The control box was functioning. But nothing was receiving power. Then I saw it. The extension cord that connected my main control box to the house had been cut. Not frayed from wear or damaged by weather or chewed by some animal. Cut. Cleanly. Deliberately. With scissors or a knife or some other sharp instrument wielded by a human hand. My blood ran cold and hot with fury. Henry? Martha's voice was worried. What is it? I held up the severed cord, my hands shaking with rage. Gregory? Now we don't know that. Who else would do this? I marched toward his house, Martha calling after me, telling me to calm down, to think about this rationally. But I was beyond rational thought. 15 years of coming in second place. 15 years of his smug superiority. And now this. Actual sabotage. I pounded on his door hard enough that my fist hurt. It was early. Not even 6:30 yet, but I didn't care. I pounded again, harder. Gregory answered the door in the silk smoking jacket that probably cost more than my car. It was burgundy with gold trim, and he wore it with matching slippers. His hair was already perfectly groomed despite the early hour, and he held a cup of what smelled like expensive imported coffee. Henry, what a pleasant surprise at this ungodly hour. You sabotaged my display. I beg your pardon? His expression was perfectly calibrated innocence, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Satisfaction? Amusement? My power cord was cut. Deliberately, I held up the severed cord. You did this. Gregory examined the cord with exaggerated interest, leaning in close. That does appear to be cut. How unfortunate. Don't play games with me, Gregory. I know it was you. That's a serious accusation, Henry. Do you have any proof? He took a sip of his coffee, perfectly calm. Any witnesses? Security footage? Physical evidence linking me to this supposed crime? I didn't. That was the problem. I'd been inside all night, exhausted, sleeping too deeply to notice anything, and I didn't have security cameras. They'd seemed like an unnecessary expense when I was budgeting for the display. I know it was you, I said quietly with as much conviction as I could muster. Well, I know it wasn't. He started to close the door and then paused, as if a thought had just occurred to him. Though I must say it is unfortunate timing. The judging is tonight, after all. I suppose you'll have to withdraw. Oh, I'm not withdrawing. No? How do you plan to have a display without power? He smiled, and it was the smile of someone who knew they'd already won. Unless you're suggesting I did this, in which case you'd need to file a police report, provide evidence, and probably delay the judging by several days, which you won't do because you have no proof, and because deep down, Henry, you know you are going to lose anyway. This just saves you the embarrassment of losing for the 16th consecutive year. I what? Cut your cord? Prove it. Call the police, I'll wait. He took another sip of coffee. Or you can accept that sometimes things just don't work out the way we want them to, and that maybe, just maybe, the universe is telling you something. He closed the door. I stood there on his porch, shaking with rage and helplessness and exhaustion. He was right about everything except one thing. I did have proof, in my gut, in my bones, in my certainty that only Gregory would do something like this. But gut feelings and certainty weren't evidence. They wouldn't hold up to any scrutiny. And he was right about the timing, too. The judging was tonight at 7 p.m. Even if I filed a police report, even if they investigated, even if they somehow found evidence, the contest would be over by then. Gregory would win by default because I had no display. Martha took my arm. Come on, let's fix the cord. What's the point? Look at his display. Gregory's house was a beacon of perfect Christmas cheer. Every light twinkling, every animation moving smoothly. Even with mine working, he's going to win. He always wins. Maybe. But we didn't do all this work to give up now. She squeezed my arm. Come on, Henry. We've been married 32 years. I know you. You don't quit. She was right. I didn't quit. It wasn't in my nature. Even when I probably should have. Even when quitting would have been the smart thing to do, I kept going. Okay, I said. Let's fix it. Part 4. The rally. Word spread quickly through Evergreen Lane about my sabotage display. Martha made a few phone calls while I was examining the damage, trying to figure out the best way to repair it. By 8 a.m., my doorbell had started ringing. Mrs. Chen from number 42 was first. She brought her son David, an electrician, along with a toolbox full of supplies. I heard what happened, she said. David's going to help you fix it. Mrs. Chen, you don't have to. Nonsense. Gregory Thornton needs to be taken down a peg, and if this is how we do it, then this is how we do it. Before I could respond, Mr. Patel from number 39 arrived with his teenage daughters, Priya and Anjali. The girls did tech theater at school, he explained. They know all about wiring and light systems. We heard about your cord, Priya said. She was 17, tall and confident. That's really messed up. Priya language, Mr. Patel said mildly. Sorry, Dad, but it is. By 9 a.m., my front yard was full of neighbors. Young Tommy Wilson from down the street showed up with his wagon, full of spare bulbs and decorations he'd collected from his garage. The Johnsons brought their ladder. Old Mr. Rodriguez, who was 83 and walked with a cane, brought hot chocolate in a huge thermos. The Patels brought samosas. The Chens brought dumplings. The Johnsons brought cookies. It was turning into a party, but a party with a purpose. Why are you all doing this? I asked, looking around at my neighbors, people I'd lived next to for decades but never really gotten to know. I'd been too busy competing with Gregory, too focused on my own projects, too wrapped up in my own world. Mrs. Chen looked up from the tangle of wires she was helping David untangle. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she had an energy that made her seem larger. Because Gregory needs to learn that Christmas isn't about having the biggest display or winning contests. It's about community, kindness, caring about your neighbors. Also, Mr. Patel added, grinning, we really want to see the look on his face when he loses. Everyone laughed at that, and I felt something shift in my chest. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was bigger than my rivalry with Gregory. This was the entire street, tired of his superiority, his condescension, his 15-year reign of pompous victory. David Chen worked on the main power system, rewiring everything to bypass the cut cord entirely. While he did that, Priya and Anjali reprogrammed my light show, adding new sequences they'd designed on their laptops. We're using a more advanced algorithm, Anjali explained. She was 15 and already taking college-level computer science courses. Your timing was good, but we can make it better. Watch this. She showed me a simulation on her laptop, and my jaw dropped. The lights moved in patterns I'd never even considered, creating waves of color that flowed across my house like water. That's incredible, right? Anjali beamed. I've been wanting to try this for ages, but never had a chance. Tommy Wilson was filling in gaps in my light coverage, crawling around on the lawn with surprising efficiency for a 10-year-old. Mr. Bennett, you got a dead spot here by the mailbox, he called out. I can fix it. By noon, my display wasn't just repaired, it was improved. David had reorganized the entire electrical system, making it more efficient and safer. The girls had created a light show that was genuinely innovative. Tommy had filled in coverage gaps I hadn't even noticed. Mr. Rodriguez had appointed himself quality control, standing in the street and directing adjustments. A little to the left, no, your other left, perfect on. But as I watched everyone work, I felt something I hadn't expected. Guilt. These people were giving up their Saturday to help me compete in a contest that ultimately didn't matter. They were using their time and skills and resources to feed my obsession. Martha? I found her inside, organizing the food everyone had brought into a proper lunch spread. I need to make a change to the display. Another change, Henry? The judging is in 7 hours. I know, but this is important. I grabbed a notepad from the kitchen drawer and started sketching. I need to add something. Can you call everyone back inside for a minute? 5 minutes later, everyone was gathered in my living room, eating samosas and dumplings and cookies, looking at me expectantly. I showed them my sketch. It was simple, just a message written in lights. There was a long moment of silence. Are you sure? Mrs. Chen asked finally. This is going to take a lot of work, and you might not win. This might actually hurt your chances. I'm sure. I looked at their faces, kind, generous faces. Faces of people who dropped everything to help a neighbor they barely knew. Win or lose, this is the right thing to do. This is what Christmas is supposed to be about. Mr. Patel studied my sketch, then smiled. I think it's perfect. Me too, Priya said. Let's do it, David agreed. For the next 6 hours, we worked together to implement my new plan. It required rearranging a significant portion of my display, and several times I wondered if I was making a huge mistake. But every time I had that thought, I'd look at my neighbors working together, laughing, talking, sharing food, helping each other, and I knew I was doing the right thing. By 5:30 p.m., we were done. My display looked different than I'd planned. Less focused on spectacle, more focused on something else. Something that mattered more than I'd realized. Thank you, I said to everyone as they packed up their tools and supplies. I can't tell you how much this means to me. Thank you, Mrs. Chen said. This is the most fun I've had in years. Same, Mr. Patel agreed. As everyone headed home to clean up before the judging, Martha put her arm around my waist. I'm proud of you, she said. Even though I'll probably lose? Especially because you'll probably lose. You're finally understanding what's important. We stood there together, watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky, waiting for the judges to arrive. Part 5. The Judging. The Evergreen Lane Christmas Decoration Contest. Judges arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, punctual as always. There were 5 of them, and they made quite a procession as they walked down the street, clipboards in hand, evaluating each display. Mayor Linda Patterson led the group. She was in her 60s, with gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that had won her 3 consecutive terms. Next to her walked Richard Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, the head of the Chamber of Commerce, a portly man who took Christmas very seriously. The local artist, Michaela Wright, brought up the rear, her artistic eye missing nothing as she examined each display. Doug Morrison, from the electric company, looked vaguely concerned about what our power bills must look like. And finally, there was 10-year-old Sophie Martinez, who'd won a school essay contest about the meaning of Christmas. They started at the far end of the street and worked their way toward us, spending about 15 minutes at each house. Gregory and I stood in our respective yards, watching them approach. Neither of us spoke to the other. The tension between us was palpable, a living thing that seemed to affect the very air. His display pulsed and glittered, a monument to excess and expense. Every element was perfectly placed, perfectly lit, perfectly executed. It was, objectively speaking, the most impressive Christmas display I'd ever seen. Klaus Weihnachten had earned his reputation. Mine was bright and cheerful, probably not as technically impressive, but there was something warm about it. Or maybe I was just being biased. It was hard to tell anymore. The judges reached Gregory's house first. They walked around slowly, taking notes, clearly impressed. The mayor nodded approvingly at the ice tree. Richard Chen took photographs of the animatronic workshop. Michaela Wright spent a long time examining the composition and color balance. Even young Sophie seemed entranced by the carousel. Gregory stood with his hands behind his back, the picture of confidence. He'd changed into what I assumed was his victory outfit, an expensive suit with a Christmas tie that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. He smiled at the judges, made witty comments about various elements, explained the technical details of particularly impressive features. I heard words like magnificent and unprecedented and truly remarkable floating over from their discussion. Richard Chen was particularly effusive, going on about how this display put Evergreen Lane on the map, how it would attract tourists, how it was good for business. My stomach sank. I'd known his display was good, but hearing the judges' reactions made it real. I wasn't going to win. Even with all the help from my neighbors, even with my new message, I wasn't going to win. After 25 minutes at Gregory's house, longer than they'd spent at any other house on the street, they finally moved on to mine. As they got closer, I saw their expressions change. Confusion at first, then curiosity, then understanding, then something that might have been admiration or might have been pity. It was hard to tell in the gathering darkness. My display was still elaborate. The lights still twinkled in Priya and Angeli's improved patterns. The reindeer still moved in their synchronized dance. The music still played from the speakers I'd carefully positioned. But in the center of it all, I'd added something new. Something that changed the entire meaning of my display. Using lights and materials my neighbors had helped me gather, I'd created a message that stretched across my entire lawn, visible from the street, impossible to miss. Merry Christmas, Evergreen Lane, from all of us. And beneath it, in smaller lights, I'd spelled out the names of every family on our street, not just the ones who'd helped me. Every family. All 47 households, including Gregory Thornton. It had taken hours to arrange all those names. We'd used every spare light we could find, borrowed from garages and attics up and down the street. The names glowed in different colors, creating a rainbow of community. The judges stood in silence for a long moment, reading the names. Sophie moved closer, her finger tracing through the air as she found her own family's name. Mr. Bennett, Mayor Patterson said finally, this is quite a display. Thank you, though I can't take all the credit. My neighbors helped. I gestured to where several of them stood in their own yards watching. This morning, my display was sabotaged. Someone cut my power cord. I thought I'd have to withdraw from the contest. But the people of Evergreen Lane came together to help me repair it and make it better than it was before. Sabotaged? Richard Chen looked shocked. That's terrible. Yes, but what happened after wasn't terrible. It was wonderful. My neighbors, people I've lived next to for years but never really knew, dropped everything to help me. And while they were helping, I realized something. I'd spent so much time trying to have the best display that I'd forgotten what Christmas is actually about. And what is it about? Mayor Patterson asked, though her slight smile suggested she already knew the answer. I looked at the names spelled out in lights, then at my neighbors standing in their yards, then at Martha beside me. It's about community. It's about coming together. It's about caring for your neighbors, even when, especially when, they don't deserve it. Little Sophie raised her hand like she was in school. That's exactly what I wrote about in my essay. That Christmas is about love and community, not presents or decorations. The judges huddled together, conferring in low voices. I tried not to watch them too intently, but it was hard not to. Gregory stood in his own yard, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked uncertain. The judges talked for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 5 minutes. Finally, Mayor Patterson stepped forward, and the entire street seemed to hold its breath. This was a difficult decision, she began. Perhaps the most difficult in the 15 years I've been judging this contest. Both displays are extraordinary in their own ways. Mr. Thornton's display represents the pinnacle of technical achievement and aesthetic grandeur. It is, without exaggeration, one of the most impressive Christmas displays I have ever seen, residential or commercial. Gregory's confidence seemed to return. He stood up straighter, preparing for his 16th consecutive victory. However, the mayor continued, and Gregory's face fell. Mr. Bennett's display represents something that ultimately we felt was more important. It represents the true spirit of Christmas. The idea that we're stronger together than we are apart, that community matters more than